The sign went up on a Tuesday. It was a small thing, a piece of cardboard, the kind you tear from a box of shipping supplies, with letters written in blue marker that had run a little because Delia's hands had been shaking. She had taped it to the inside of the front window of Delia's sweet corner at 10 minutes past 5 in the morning, before the ovens had even finished their first preheat cycle, before the city outside had properly woken up. She did not go back and read it after she taped it. She could not. The sign read, "After 14 years, Sweet Corner will be closing its doors permanently on Friday, November 15th. Thank you for every single morning." That was all. She had spent 3 nights writing that sign, and those were the only words that felt honest. Now, standing at the work table with flour on her forearms and the radio playing low, she tried to act as if it were any other Wednesday. She portioned the dough for the sweet potato rolls. She mixed the cream cheese filling for the morning's cheese danishes. She slid the first sheet of cinnamon twists into the oven, and she breathed through the warm, sweet smell of them the way she had been breathing through that smell for most of her adult life. She was 44 years old. She had opened this bakery at 30. She had been baking since she was 9, standing on a step stool in her grandmother's kitchen on the east side of the city, while her grandmother, Mama C, pressed her small hands into soft dough and told her, "Whatever you put love into, it comes back to you doubled." Delia had believed that for a long time. She was not sure she believed it anymore. The math had not changed. 3 months of fighting it had not changed it. The building had been sold. The new owner had sent a letter in August, polite and impersonal, notifying her that her lease would not be renewed when it expired in December. He had offered her a buyout of her remaining months if she vacated by November 15th. When she had asked, through her cousin who knew a little about business law, whether she had any recourse, the answer had come back the same as the math. No. The building was his. The decision was made. She had 3 months to figure out where to go, and in 3 months she had not figured it out, because there was no place to go. That was Sweet Corner. Her daughter Nia was 19, and in her second year of culinary school, 2 states away. Delia had called her the night she taped the sign up, and Nia had cried and said she was coming home, and Delia had said, "No, you stay. You finish." And that was the other sign she could not read back to herself. Outside on the sidewalk, the city was coming up slowly. A garbage truck rumbled past. A man walked a dog. The streetlights were still on, their yellow glow sitting in the wet November pavement. Delia pulled the first tray of cinnamon twists and set them on the rack, and did not let herself think past Friday. She had been telling herself that for 3 days. Don't think past Friday. Just make the bread. Just open the window. Just get through each morning and let the mornings use you up the way they always have. The mornings had always used her up. That was the truth she had never minded. She had been waking at 3:30 for 14 years, slipping out of bed in the dark of whatever hour felt like 3:30, driving the 6 blocks to the bakery when it was still all sodium streetlight and quiet, letting herself in through the back door and hitting the oven switches and filling the kettles and beginning the first of the day's many small and necessary rituals. The yeasted doughs went in first, the ones that needed time. The sweet potato rolls and the cinnamon buns and the honey wheat loaves that she had been making from the same handwritten recipe since the first year. A recipe she had adapted from Mama C's and written out on a sheet of notebook paper that was now stored in a plastic sleeve in the drawer by the work table, soft with handling, the ink in one corner worn faint from the particular place her thumb rested when she set it down. She had touched that recipe this morning without meaning to, the way a person reaches for the thing that hurts. The smell of the bakery in the dark before opening was a different thing than the smell when the door was open and the morning was full of people. In the dark before opening, it was private. It was the smell of the thing itself, the yeast working in the warmth, and the butter, and the brown sugar, and the particular sharpness of the cream cheese softening on the counter, and underneath all of it, something she could not name but had come to understand as the accumulation of 14 years of exactly this. Smell does something to memory that sight does not, and she had learned that the hard way the first morning after Mama C died, when she had come in and the oven smell had hit her at the back door and she had stood in the alley for 3 minutes before she could go inside. She was going to miss this smell. That was the thought she had been fighting, and standing at the work table at 5 in the morning on the last Wednesday, it arrived fully and she simply let it be there. If you have ever loved something you built with your hands, you know what it is to be used up by it and grateful for every hour. There is no use in making it smaller than it is. It was big. It was. It had been the biggest thing in her daily life for almost half her life, and on Wednesday morning at 5 o'clock, with the cinnamon twists in the oven and the cheese Danish filling ready on the counter and the flour still settling on the surface of the work table, it was exactly that big, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. The front door opened at 6:30 when she turned the lock and flipped the small hand-painted sign from closed to open. The sign was made by a woman named Rosie who had a studio 2 blocks over, and Rosie had made it as a gift when Delia first opened 14 years ago. It was painted wood, warm cream background, the words in deep brown with a little gold on the letters. Delia had touched the gold on those letters every single morning for 14 years when she flipped it. She touched it this morning and let her fingers rest there for just a moment longer than usual. Marcus came in first, the way he almost always did. He was 63, retired transit worker, lived 4 blocks away, and he had been coming in 5 mornings a week since year 2, when his wife Pauline was still alive, and he used to bring home 2 coffees and a bag of her cheese biscuits on Saturday mornings. Pauline had passed going on 6 years now. Marcus still came 5 mornings a week. He had told Delia once that the smell of the place in the morning was the only thing that still felt like Pauline's kitchen. He came in, pulled off his cap, and looked at the sign in the window. He stood there for a moment, hat in hand, reading it. "D," he said. Just her name. The way a person says a name when they cannot find any other word. "Morning, Marcus," she said. She poured his coffee before he reached the counter. Large, 2 sugars, the way he had taken it for 12 years. He did not say anything else for a while. He sat at his stool at the end of the counter and drank his coffee and ate the cheese biscuit she set in front of him without him asking, because she always did, and she watched him out of the corner of her eye and saw him work something out in his face, some private accounting of things he had not planned on losing, and she looked away to give him that. The morning rush came and went. It was not a big rush. It had not been a big rush for a while since the new coffee chain had opened 3 doors down 18 months ago with its app orders and its loyalty points and its $20 seasonal drinks. She had lost about a third of her walk-in traffic to that place. She bore no ill will toward anyone who went there. She understood people went where the prices were and where the lines moved fast and where there was a phone notification reminding them it was time for their morning habit. She just could not compete with a notification. It had cost her, though. The math of that loss was simple and cruel. 140 regular customers at an average of $8 per visit, 5 visits a week, was the kind of number she had not looked at directly but had felt in the bank balance every month for the last 18 months. She had let one part-timer go first, a girl named Kezia, who had worked Saturday mornings through her senior year of high school and who cried when Delia told her, not from the money, but from the thing itself, because Kezia had told her once that the bakery was the only job she'd ever had that felt like it meant something. Delia had written her a reference letter that she put real care into, and she had heard from Kezia's mother 6 months later that Kezia had gotten into a hospitality management program and was doing well, and she had held on to that the way you hold on to the small mercies in a long, bad run. The other part-timer had left on her own a month later for a job with better hours. After that, Delia had worked alone. What she could do, alone and with thinning margins, was make the cheese Danish the way Mama C had taught her, with real cream cheese and a pinch of cardamom that nobody else put in it, anywhere in this city as far as she could tell, and she could know every remaining regular's order before they reached the counter, and she could remember that Marcus took his coffee 2 sugars, and that a woman named Sandra brought her elderly mother in on Thursdays, and her mother had a soft palate and needed the rolls cut small, and that there was a young woman named Priya who came in on Monday mornings before her hospital shift, and always ordered 2 things, one to eat, standing at the counter, and one to carry in a paper bag, and who had told Delia once, on an ordinary morning, that she was a resident, and that the bakery was the only place in her morning commute where someone said good morning to her and meant it. And there was Devon. Devon she had noticed in the 2nd month he started coming in. A boy who spent money carefully and ate the way someone eats when they are genuinely hungry and not performing hunger, and who had lingered one afternoon by the small chalkboard where she sometimes posted baking notes and asked her, with the particular dignity of a teenager who is trying to be taken seriously, how you got the layers in a croissant. She had been behind on the afternoon's work and had told him the truth, which was that it took about 2 days and a great deal of patience and a lot of butter, and he had listened the way you listen when something finally answers a question you have been carrying for a while. After that, she slipped an extra pastry in his bag most weeks without making a show of it, because she recognized what she was looking at, and she knew that recognition was not nothing. Those things had always felt like enough. For 14 years, they had felt like more than enough. Not the easiest version of enough, not the comfortable version, but enough in the sense that matters most, the sense that what you are doing has weight and is adding something to the world that wouldn't be there otherwise. Thursday morning arrived, and with it the last full baking day before the close. Delia had decided to do a full bake. All the things, every item on the board. She started at 3:30 in the morning and she worked through the dark in the rhythm she knew better than any other rhythm in her life. And somewhere around 4:15, standing at the work table with her hands in a double batch of sweet potato dough, she felt the grief arrive properly for the first time. Not the practical grief she had been managing for weeks, the grief of logistics and finances and the phone calls and the lease and the letter. The real grief, the one that lived in the body. She pressed her hands into the dough and she let herself feel it. She did not try to bake through it or past it. She stopped and felt it. Mama C had died 8 years ago, 6 years after Delia opened Sweet Corner. She had come to the bakery one Sunday and sat in the window booth and eaten a cheese Danish and said, "You did it, baby." And those 4 words had been enough. Delia had them still, stored somewhere between her sternum and her spine, and she found them now in the dark of the bakery kitchen and held onto them. You did it, baby. She had, for 14 years she had. She wiped her hands and went back to the dough. At 5:45 Friday morning, she came out of the kitchen to put the last tray of cheese Danishes into the front display case, and she looked out the front window. There were people on the sidewalk. Not a few people, not a small group clustered near the door waiting for the 6:30 opening, the way a handful of the most faithful regulars sometimes did. A line. An actual line of people stretching down the block, past the dry cleaner, past the cell phone repair place with the yellow awning, past the laundromat, all the way to the corner, and then bending slightly around it so she could not see the end of it. She could see their breath rising in the cold morning air, small white clouds appearing and disappearing in the grey November light. They were in coats, some of them in heavy parkas with the hoods up, some in lighter jackets they were clearly regretting, some holding thermoses and paper cups from other places, some standing with their hands deep in their pockets, shifting from foot to foot against the cold. They were talking quietly among themselves. There were at least 40 people, maybe more. She had a tray of cheese Danishes in her hands. She set the tray on the counter. She did it very carefully, as if the care she put into setting it down could hold the moment still for a moment longer. She stood at the window and could not move. The light outside was still the flat grey of early November morning. In the lines she could see the white puff of someone's breath and the red of a child's parka, and the particular posture of Marcus near the front, the way he stood with his weight slightly forward and his cap straight on his head, the way he had stood at the counter of this bakery for 12 years. Marcus, who had been there first on so many ordinary mornings that ordinary had become a word for something sacred. Her hands went to her face. She pressed them there, fingertips at her cheekbones, the way she had pressed her grandmother's hands to her face once, long ago, when she was young and frightened and needed to feel something solid and warm. She did not know all of them. That was what broke her open at first, the simple fact of it. She knew most of them, the way a person who has run a neighbourhood bakery for 14 years knows the neighbourhood, the faces and the names and the orders and the particular stories that come across a counter in the small hours. She knew Marcus, who was near the front of the line, which meant he had come early even for himself. She knew Sandra, who was there with her elderly mother on a day that was not Thursday. She knew Devon, the teenage boy from Tuesdays who was there in a school jacket, with his hands buried in his pockets, rocking back and forth on his heels. She knew Rosie, who had made the painted sign. She knew the couple from the apartment building on Crane Street who had ordered their wedding cake from her 7 years ago, a lemon layer cake with blackberry jam filling and a cream cheese frosting. She knew the man who had told her once, on an ordinary morning, that he had gone to an NA meeting for the first time in years and had come to the bakery afterward because he needed to be somewhere that smelled like someone's grandmother's kitchen. She did not know the others, and the others were there. That was the part that made her press her hands harder against her face. They had come because someone had posted the sign on a neighbourhood page online. She learned this later over the course of the morning in fragments from people who told her the story as they told her other things. Someone had taken a photo of the cardboard sign in the window on Tuesday, the first morning the sign was there, and had written above the photo asking if anyone knew this place. Looks like Sweet Corner is closing. Shame. And that post had gotten 347 comments and had been shared to 3 other neighbourhood pages and to a page for people who had grown up in this part of the city and moved away. And at some point, someone had written in the comments that they had grown up 2 blocks from here and my mother went to this bakery every week for 20 years and they would drive 5 hours to be there on the last day. And someone else had said the same. And that had been the beginning of something Delia had not known was gathering. By Wednesday evening, the post had reached people she had never met, people who had been in once on a visit to a friend and eaten a lemon pound cake and never forgotten the taste of it, people whose elderly mothers had gone for years, people who had moved to other cities and recognised the address in the photo and felt the loss of it from 3 states away. One comment said simply that this was the end of something real. It had over 200 likes, which was the kind of agreement that happens when a sentence names exactly the right thing. She did not know any of that, standing at the window with her hands pressed to her face. She just knew that there were 40 people, at least 40 people, in the November cold on the sidewalk outside her window, waiting, and she had better open. She touched the gold letters on Rosie's wooden sign the way she always had, and she held them for a moment and she turned the lock. What followed was the fullest morning Sweet Corner had ever had. Not the busiest morning necessarily, though it was very busy, the register running steadily, and the line at the door not dropping below 12 people until past 9 o'clock, but the fullest. But there is a difference between a morning where the line moves fast and the register runs hot and the bags go out at speed, and a morning where every person who steps through the door seems to want to take a breath and stand still for a moment before they say what they came to say. The line moved slowly because people were doing something more than ordering. They were doing the thing you do when you want a place to know it mattered to you before it is gone, and that takes a little longer than ordering. She worked the counter alone, and it did not feel lonely. It felt like what it was, which was the accumulated weight of 14 years of quiet faithfulness, arriving all at once instead of one morning at a time, the way it had always come before. Marcus did not linger in line. He came straight to the counter the way he always did. The way a man comes to a counter he has come to so many times that the root is in his body. And he said, Pauline would have been out there at 4 in the morning if she'd known. He said it quietly, not to the room, just to her, the way the most important things are usually said, and that was all. He did not add anything to it, or take anything back. He paid for his coffee and his biscuit, and he sat at his stool at the end of the counter, and he stayed for 2 hours drinking 2 more coffees that she poured without him asking, watching the room fill and thin and fill again, an anchor in a moving current. Sandra's mother, who was 81 and had to be helped up the 2 front steps, pressed Delia's hand with both of hers and said, "You bake with love, girl. It comes out of everything you make. I can taste it every time." Devon handed her a card. A folded piece of paper, actually. Not a store-bought card, with a drawing on the front that she recognised as Sweet Corner's storefront, done in coloured pencil with a lot of care and a little inexperience. The details lovingly placed, the striped awning and the painted sign, and the small chalkboard out front. Inside he had written, in the careful handwriting of a boy who had been taught to make his letters right, that she had always put extra in his bag, and he had never forgotten it. He was going to be a chef, he wrote, and when he opened his place, he was going to do the same thing she did. She excused herself for 30 seconds and stood in the kitchen and cried into a dish towel. Then she came back out because there were people in line, and she worked. The strangers were careful with her too. Some of them said simply that they had heard and wanted to come. One woman, who introduced herself as a teacher from a school 6 blocks away, said that she had come in once with a class on a field trip 3 years ago, and that Delia had given each of the children a small twist and shown them how the braiding worked. "They still talk about it," the teacher said. "Kids who are 9 or 12 now, and they still talk about that morning." Delia did not remember that field trip specifically, which told her something about how many mornings there had been, how much had passed through this room that she had given without keeping account. A man she did not recognise at all, somewhere in his 50s, in a paint-speckled work jacket, waited patiently through a long line, ordered a coffee and 1 cinnamon twist, and when he reached the counter he said, "I'm not from this neighbourhood. I drove 45 minutes. I used to work a job over here 8 years ago, maybe 9. I ate here every morning for 2 years. I just wanted to come back before it was gone. He paid, he took his twist, he ate it, standing at the window looking out at the street. When he left, he said, "Thank you," the way a person says it when they mean something bigger than the transaction. At 10:30 in the morning, with 2 hours left before she planned to close for the last time, the display cases were nearly empty. This had never happened before noon in 14 years. The sweet potato rolls were gone before 8. The cinnamon twists were gone by 8:30. The honey wheat loaves had gone in the first 45 minutes, which meant she had not made enough, which was the first time she had not made enough of the honey wheat loaves in recent memory. The tea cakes she had worried over in the dark had gone entirely to one table, a group of 4 older women who had come together and who ate them with the careful pleasure of people who understood what they were tasting. Delia was working the counter alone, the way she had for most of the bakery's life, and she was tired in her bones in the way she had always been tired by 10:30 in the morning, because 3:30 to 10:30 is 7 hours of sustained work. But it was not the hollow tired. It was the tired that has weight to it, the tired of having done what you were made to do. She had learned a long time ago to tell the difference. She was packaging the last 6 cheese danishes, wrapping each one in tissue the way she always did, even when no one asked for tissue, and it would have been faster not to bother, because she had always believed a thing worth eating was worth the tissue. When the front door opened and a woman came in who Delia recognised after a beat as Cheryl Odom, the woman who owned the building 2 blocks over where Rosie had her studio. She had seen Cheryl on the street a few times over the years. She had not known her name until Rosie had mentioned it once in passing. Cheryl was in her early 70s, a small, brisk woman in a good coat, and she had not been in Sweet Corner before, at least not that Delia could place. Cheryl looked around at the line still snaking out the door, at the nearly bare display cases, at the people sitting at the tables eating and talking quietly, and her expression shifted in a way that was hard to read. She came to the front of the line, which Delia would have gently corrected, except that Cheryl held up a hand and said, "I'm not here to order. I'm here to talk to you for 5 minutes, if you can spare them." Delia set down the tissue paper she was using to package the danishes. "I can spare them," she said. Cheryl said, "I heard about the closing. I want you to know that I think it's a damn shame." She paused. "I also want you to know that I have a vacant storefront on Clement Street, 2 blocks from here, ground floor, similar square footage to this space, and I am prepared to offer you a lease at the same rate you've been paying here for the first 2 years, with the option to renegotiate at the same rate after that if the community supports it." She looked at the room. "I think the community supports it." Delia stared at her. "I have been walking past this place for 14 years, Cheryl said. "I should have come in sooner. That is my problem, and I own it. My grandmother ran a pie shop in this city for 30 years, and when it closed because nobody offered her anything. I have been carrying that for a long time." She set a business card on the counter. "You don't have to decide today, but I want you to know the offer is there." The room had gone quiet. People at the tables had stopped their quiet conversations. Marcus was looking at Delia from his stool with an expression that was somewhere between prayer and permission. Delia picked up the card. She looked at it. She set it down on the counter beside the tissue paper and the last 6 cheese danishes. She said, "I need to make some calls. I need to talk to my daughter." She said it simply and without drama, because the situation was not dramatic. It was just large, the way certain moments are large in a life. Not loud, just large. Cheryl nodded. "Take your time," she said. "I'll be easy to reach." She said it with no pressure in it, which was the only way Delia could have heard it at that moment. And then Cheryl Odom ordered a coffee and 1 cheese Danish, and she sat at a table near the window. She sat the way a person sits when they are not in a hurry and have made a decision and are at peace with it. She ate the Danish with a fork, cutting small pieces the way someone eats something they intend to taste rather than just finish, and Delia watched her close her eyes on the first bite. It was not a performance. It was just the response of a person to something genuinely good. Delia turned back to the counter, and there was a small moment where she stood still in the middle of all the noise of the room, the talking and the chair scraping, and the last few people still in line, and she thought about her grandmother, and the cardamom, and the 30 years of pie shop that had closed without anyone offering anything, and she thought about what it meant that one woman with a building on Clement Street had walked into a bakery on its last day, carrying that history, and set a business card on a counter. If kindness keeps a long memory, so does a lease not offered for 30 years. Cheryl had been carrying something too. The morning outside the window had given her the reason she had been looking for. The last 2 hours passed in a kind of grace. Delia did not rush anyone out. She let people stay. She refilled coffees without charging for them. She packaged the last of the bread and set it on the counter in a basket with a handwritten note that said, "Please take one. No charge. Eat it warm if you could." And it was gone in 12 minutes. At 12:30, when the last customer had finally gone, Delia stood behind the counter and looked at the room. Rosie had stayed to help her with the final clean-up, which was itself a kind of grace. They worked in companionable quiet, wiping down the counters and the display cases and the tables, stacking the chairs, sweeping the floor that Delia had swept 5,000 times. At one point, Rosie said, "Are you going to call Cheryl?" Delia swept the last corner of the floor and looked at the empty display cases and the bare walls where she had put up the same 4 framed photos 14 years ago. Photos she had taken herself. Mama C's kitchen, a loaf of bread cooling on a rack, the sunrise over the block the week she opened, and Nia, at 6 years old, standing on a step stool, pressing her small hands into dough. "Yeah," she said, "I'm going to call Cheryl." She called Nia first. Nia answered on the second ring because she had been waiting. "Mom," she said, and Delia could hear the held breath in it. "I'm going to be okay," Delia said. "Something happened today. Let me tell you." She told her. All of it. The line in the cold, Marcus and Sandra's mother and Devon's coloured pencil card, the teacher from the school 6 blocks away, the man in the paint-speckled jacket who had driven 45 minutes, the nearly empty cases by 10:30 in the morning, the woman with the business card still sitting on the counter. Nia was quiet for a long moment after Delia finished. "Mama C was right," she said finally. Delia laughed, which surprised her. She usually was. "Whatever you put love into comes back to you doubled," Nia said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. "I know, baby," Delia said. "I know." She stayed on the phone with Nia for a while, standing in the empty bakery in the early afternoon light, and they talked about Clement Street and the square footage and the oven situation, and what a 2-year lease at the current rate actually meant in terms of what was possible. And they talked about Mama C's kitchen and the cardamom in the cream cheese filling and how you never wrote that recipe down because it lived in the hands. And they talked about Devon and how she was going to find out where he was applying and write him a letter. After she hung up, she sat for a moment at the counter, just sitting, in the quiet of the room she had filled every morning for 14 years. The room looked different, empty. It looked larger, which she had expected, and also more itself somehow, the bones of it more visible without people filling the space. The exposed brick on the north wall. The pressed tin ceiling she had repainted herself in year 3 when the original paint had begun to peel. The window booths with their worn vinyl cushions, dark green, that she had reupholstered once and meaning to do again, always meaning to do again. The small chalkboard by the counter where she wrote the specials, and occasionally, when she was in the mood, a line from a recipe or something Mama C had said, because she believed that a bakery should say things on its walls as well as with its bread. Today the chalkboard said, in her own handwriting, "Thank you for 14 years of good mornings." It was the last thing she had written on it, early in the week, and she had not erased it. She was going to miss this room. She had been trying not to think about that directly, and now she let herself think it directly, because the room was empty and the morning was over, and there was no particular reason left to hold anything at a careful distance. She was going to miss this room, and she was also, she realized, sitting quietly with that knowledge, going to build another one. It would not be this room. It would be a different room on Clement Street, with a longer counter and wider windows and whatever accumulated meaning she would pour into it over however many years she had to pour it. It would not be this room, and it would also, eventually, be hers in the way a room becomes yours when you spend yourself in it, day after day, when you know its ovens and its floor and its particular morning smell, when you have stood in it at 3:30 in the morning more times than you can count, and felt it use you up and been grateful. That was the part she had given her. Not the lease terms, though the lease terms were what made it possible. The part that mattered was that someone had looked at a room she had not seen yet and said that this room could be for her and that she wanted it to be. Then she called Cheryl. She called. Have you ever watched someone you love be seen finally by the right person at the right moment? If you have, then you know what it feels like to be in that room. Leave a comment below and tell us about the person who built something that deserved to be kept. We read everyone. 3 weeks later, Delia unlocked the door of her new space on Clement Street for the first time at 5 in the morning. The oven was bigger. The counter was longer. The front windows were wide and let in more light. There was a small wall near the entrance where she had already decided what she would put there. Mama C's rolling pin in a shadow box frame, the 4 photographs from the old space, and Devon's coloured pencil card, laminated because she intended to keep it. Rosie was there with a new painted sign, cream background, deep brown letters, a little gold. It said, Delia's Sweet Corner. In smaller letters below, moved with love to 441 Clement Street. Rosie had added something to this one that she had not put on the original. A small detail in the lower corner, a tiny loaf of bread and a single rising stem of wheat, which was the kind of thing Rosie did when she was making something she cared about. Delia held the sign for a moment before they hung it. She felt the weight of the wood and the dried paint under her fingers, and the particular warmth of a thing made by someone who loved you well enough to show up at 5 in the morning. Marcus was there too, first in line before the door was even unlocked, in his cap and his coat with his hands in his pockets. He gave her a single nod when she opened the door, the nod of a man who had already done his accounting and arrived at peace with the numbers. She made his coffee first. 2 sugars. She set it on the counter before he sat down. The cheese danishes came out of the oven at 6, the same as always. The cardamom was in the filling the way it always was, because that was not a thing that changed with an address. She set the first tray in the case, and she stepped back and looked at the room, at the light coming through the wide windows and the painted sign on the wall and the people beginning to come through the door out of the November cold, and she felt her grandmother's hands over hers the way she sometimes did when the morning was very early and very quiet, and the dough was ready and the oven was warm. You did it, baby. She had, and now she was going to do it again. If this story moved you, you might also love the story of the woman who gave away her last $20 at a bus stop and never expected what happened next. It is right here on this channel, and we think you will feel it the same way. This story is a work of fiction, created for entertainment and inspired by the spirit of community and the people who build something real with their hands every day. Any resemblance to actual people or places is coincidental.